Chapter 4. Seeming Tapas. Leaving the temple, Venkataraman wandered out into the town. Someone called out to ask whether he wanted his tuft removed. As the Orthodox caste Hindu wears a small tuft of hair at the back of his head, and removing it and shaving the head is a sign of renunciation. The question must have been inspired, for there was no outer sign that this Brahmin youth had renounced or intended to renounce the world. He immediately consented and was conducted to the Anyakulam tank, where a number of barbers plied their trade. There he had his head completely shaved. And, standing on the steps of the tank, he threw away his remaining money, just over 3 rupees, and never handled money again. He also threw away the packet of sweets which he was still holding. Why give sweets to this block of a body? He took off the sacred thread that is a sign of caste and threw it away, for he who renounces the world renounces not only home and property, but caste also, and all civil status. Then he took off the dhoti, the white cloth wound round the body from the waist down, in which he was wearing, and tore off a strip to serve him as a loincloth, and threw the rest away. So he returned to the temple, having completed the acts of renunciation. As he approached it, he recollected that the scriptures enjoin a bath after having one's hair cut, but he said to himself, "Why give this block of a body the luxury of a bath?" But immediately there was a short, sharp shower, so that before entering the temple he had his bath. He did not re-enter the inner shrine. There was no need. Indeed, it was 3 years before he went there again. He took up his abode in the 1,000-pillared hall, a raised stone platform open on all sides, the roof supported by a forest of slender sculptured pillars, and there sat, immersed in the bliss of being. Day after day, day and night, he sat unmoving. He no longer needed the world. Its shadow existence had no interest for him as he sat absorbed in the real. For some weeks he continued so, scarcely moving, never speaking. So began the second phase of his life after self-realization. During the first phase, the glory had been concealed, and he had accepted the same conditions of life as previously, with the same obedience to teachers and elders. During this second phase, he was turned inwards, completely ignoring the outer world. And this, as will be shown, merged gradually into the third phase, which lasted for half a century, during which his radiance shone like the midday sun on all who approached him. However, these phases applied only to the outer manifestation of his state, for he declared explicitly, and a number of times, that there was absolutely no change or development in the state of consciousness. A sadhu known as Seshadri Swami, who had arrived at Tiruvannamalai a few years previously, took it on himself to look after the Brahmana Swami, as Venkataraman began to be called, so far as any looking after was needed. This was not altogether an advantage, because Seshadri made the impression of being slightly deranged, and thereby drew on himself the persecution of schoolboys. And so now they extended their attentions to his protege, whom they called Little Seshadri, and began throwing stones at him, partly out of boyish cruelty, partly because they were intrigued to see one not much older than they themselves, sitting like a statue, and as one of them put it later, wanted to find out whether he was real or not. Seshadri Swami's attempts to keep these boys off were not very successful. They sometimes had the opposite effect. So the Brahmana Swami sought refuge in the Patala Lingam, an underground vault in the 1,000-pillared hall, dark and dank, where the sun's rays never penetrate. It was seldom that any human being entered. Only ants, vermin, and mosquitoes flourished there. They preyed upon him until his thighs were covered with sores that ran blood and pus. To the end of his life, the scars remained. The few weeks he spent there were a descent into hell. And yet, absorbed in the bliss of being, he was unmoved by the torment. It was unreal to him. A pious woman, Ratmaal, entered the vault to take him food and besought him to leave the place and come to her house, but he made no sign of having heard. She left a clean cloth, begging him to sit or lie on it or use it against the insect pests, but he did not touch it. Afraid to enter the dark vault, the youthful tormentors threw stones at its entrance or broken pot shards that crashed and sent splinters flying. Seshadri Swami mounted guard, but this only incited them the more. At noon one day, a certain Venkatachala Mudalai approached the 1,000-pillared hall, and, indignant at seeing boys throwing stones into the temple precincts, seized a stick and drove them away. On coming back, he saw Seshadri Swami emerging from the gloomy recesses of the hall. He was startled for a moment, but quickly recovered and asked Seshadri whether he was hurt. "No, but go and look after the little Swami in there." And after saying this, he went away. Astonished, Mudalai descended the steps into the vault. Coming from the bright daylight to the dark, he could see nothing at first. Gradually, however, his eyes grew accustomed, and he made out the form of the young Swami. Aghast at what he saw, he went and told a sadhu who was working in the nearby flower garden with a few disciples. They also came to look. The young Swami neither moved nor spoke, and seemed oblivious of their presence. So they lifted him up bodily and carried him out. They set him down before a shrine of Subramaniam, without his showing any consciousness of what was happening. For about 2 months, the Brahmana Swami stayed at the Subramaniam shrine. He would sit motionless in samadhi, total absorption, and sometimes nourishment had to be put into his mouth, as he paid no heed when it was offered him. For some weeks he did not even trouble to tie on a loincloth. He was looked after by a Muni Swami, one who observed silence and also lived at the shrine. The shrine of the goddess Uma in the temple was daily washed down with a mixture of milk, water, turmeric powder, sugar, bananas, and other ingredients, and the Muni used to take a tumbler of this strange concoction to the young Swami daily. He gulped it down, indifferent to the flavor, and it was all the nourishment he received. After some time, the temple priest noticed this and gave orders that pure milk should be supplied to the Muni, henceforth to be given to the Brahmana Swami. After a few weeks, the Brahmana Swami moved out to the temple garden, full of tall oleander bushes some of them 10 or 12 feet high. Here also he would sit immersed in bliss, deep samadhi. He even moved about in trance, for on waking to the world, which happened on rare occasions, he would sometimes find himself under a different bush with no recollection of how he got there. He went next to the hall of the temple vehicles, on which the images are taken in procession on holy days. Here also he would sometimes wake to the world to find his body in a different place, having avoided the various obstacles on the way without injury, though totally unaware. After this he sat for some time under a tree alongside the road that runs round the temple precincts within its outer wall and is used for temple processions. He remained for some time here and at the Mangai Pilar shrine. Annually, large crowds of pilgrims thronged to Tiruvannamalai for the festival of Kartikai, falling in November or December, when a beacon is lit on the summit of Arunachala in token of Shiva's appearance as a pillar of light, described more thoroughly in Chapter 6. And on this year, many came to gaze on the young Swami or prostrate themselves before him. It was at this time that the first regular devotee became attached to him. Udandi Nayanar had engaged in spiritual studies, but had not found peace therefrom. Seeing the young Swami immersed in perpetual samadhi, and apparently oblivious of the body, he felt that here was realization, and that through him he would find peace. It made him happy to serve the Swami, but there was little he could do. He kept away the crowds of sightseers and stopped the persecution by the young boys. Much of his time he spent reciting Tamil works, expounding the supreme doctrine of Advaita, or non-duality. His great hope was to receive spiritual instruction, upadisa, from the Swami. But the Swami never spoke to him, and he himself did not presume to speak first and intrude on his silence. About this time, one Annamalai Tambaran passed by the young Swami's tree. He was so impressed by his serene beauty as he sat there in solitude, untouched by care and thought, that he fell on his face before him, and thereafter went daily to bow down to him. He was a sadhu who used to walk through the town with a few companions, singing devotional songs. With the alms received, he fed the poor and made puja at the tomb of his Adina Guru, or the founder of his line of gurus, outside the town. After some time, it occurred to him that the young Swami would be less disturbed at Guru Murtam, as this shrine had come to be called, and also, as it was now the cool season, would be more sheltered. He hesitated to suggest it, and talked the matter over first with Nayanar, since neither of them had ever spoken to the Swami. Finally, he mustered up courage to make the suggestion. The Swami consented, and in February 1897, less than half a year after his arrival at Tiruvannamalai, went with him to Guru Murtam. There was no change in his mode of life when he arrived there. The floor of the shrine was infested with ants, but the Swami seemed oblivious to their crawling over him and biting. After some time, a stool was placed in one corner for him to sit on, and its legs immersed in water to keep them away. But even then he leaned back against the wall, and so made a bridge for them. From the constant sitting, his back made a permanent imprint on the wall. Pilgrims and sightseers began to throng to Guru Murtam, and many would prostrate themselves before the Swami, some with prayers for boons, and some out of pure reverence. The crowd became such that it was necessary to erect a bamboo palisade round his seat so as to prevent them at least from touching him. At first, Tambaram supplied the little food that was necessary out of that offered at the shrine of his guru. But before long, he left Tiruvannamalai. He told Nayanar that he would be back in a week, but as things turned out, he was away for more than a year. And a few weeks later, Nayanar also had to leave to go to his mutt, the private temple or shrine, and the Swami was left without an attendant. There was no difficulty over food. In fact, there were several devotees by now who wished to supply food regularly. The more pressing need was to keep away the crowds of sightseers and visitors. It was not long before another regular attendant came. A Malayalam sadhu named Palani Swami was devoting his life to the worship of the god Vinayaka. He lived in great austerity, eating only one meal a day, and that merely the food that had been offered to the god in puja, without even salt for seasoning. A friend of his, Srinivasa Iyer by name, said to him one day, "Why do you spend your life with this stone Swami? There is a young Swami in flesh and blood at Guru Murtam. He is steeped in tapas, austerity, like the young Dhruva in the Puranas. If you go and serve him and attach yourself to him, your life will attain its purpose." About the same time, others also told him about the young Swami, and that he had no attendant, and what a blessing it would be to serve him. Accordingly, he went to Guru Murtam to see. He was stirred to the depths at the very sight of the Swami. For some time longer he continued his worship at the Vinayaka temple out of a sense of duty, but his heart was with the living Swami, and before long his devotion to him became all-absorbing. He consecrated the rest of his life to his service, remaining his attendant for 21 years. There was little enough that he could do. He received food offerings from the devotees, but all that the Swami would accept was a single cup of food at noon each day, the remainder being returned to the givers as prasad, or grace in the form of gift. If he needed to go into town for any purpose, usually to get some spiritual or devotional book from a friend, he would lock up the shrine, and on his return would find the Swami in the same position as he had left him. The Swami's body was utterly neglected. He ignored it completely. It was unwashed, his hair had grown again and was thick and matted, his fingernails had grown long and curled over. Some took this to be a sign of great age, and whispered that he had preserved his youth of body by yogic powers. But actually his body was weakened to the limits of endurance. When he needed to go out, he had barely the strength to rise. He would raise himself up a few inches and then sink back again, weak and dizzy, and would have to try several times before he could rise to his feet. On one such occasion he reached the door and was holding on to it with both hands when he perceived that Palani Swami was supporting him. Always averse to receiving help, he asked, "Why are you holding me?" And Palani Swami replied, "Swami was going to fall, and I supported him to prevent him falling." One who has attained union with the divine is sometimes worshipped in the same manner as a temple idol, with the burning of camphor and sandal paste, flowers, libation, and chanting. When Tambaram was at Guru Murtam, he decided to worship the Swami in this way. The first day, the Swami was taken by surprise, and he succeeded in his purpose. But the next day, when Tambaram brought in his daily cup of food, he saw written on the wall above the Swami with charcoal the words in Tamil, "This is service enough for this," meaning that food was all that should be offered to this body. It came as a surprise to his devotees that the Swami had mundane education and could read and write. One of them decided to utilize the fact to find out where he came from and what his name had been. He was an elderly man, Venkatarama Iyer by name, a head accountant at an office in town. He used to come every morning and sit for a while in meditation in the presence of the Swami before going to his work. A vow of silence is respected, and from his not speaking, it was presumed that the Swami had taken such a vow. But one who does not speak occasionally writes messages, and now that he knew the Swami could write, Venkatarama Iyer was insistent. He placed before him a sheet of paper and a pencil on one of the books that Palaniswami brought there, and besought him to write his name and place of origin. The Swami made no response to his pleading until at last he declared that he would neither eat nor go to his office until he received the information he desired. And then, finally, it was written in English, Venkataraman Tiruchuzi. His knowing English came as a further surprise that Venkatarama Iyer was puzzled by the name Tiruchuzi in English transliteration. The Swami therefore took the book on which the paper had rested to see whether it was in Tamil, so that he could point out the letter that is commonly transliterated as ZH, a letter midway between R and L in sound. Finding it to be the Paripuranam, the book which had so profound an effect on him before the great spiritual awakening, he looked up the passage where the town is mentioned, honored in song by Sundaramurti Swami, and showed it to Venkatarama Iyer. In May of 1898, after a little more than a year at Gurumurtam, the Swami moved to a neighboring mango orchard. Its owner, Venkatarama Nakar, proposed a change to Palaniswami, as the orchard could be locked and would afford more privacy. The Swami and Palaniswami each occupied a watchman's shelter there, and the owner gave the gardener strict instructions that nobody was to be admitted without Palaniswami's permission. Venkataraman stayed here for about 6 months, and it was here that he began to accumulate the vast erudition he later possessed. Characteristically, it was not from any desire for learning, but purely to help a devotee. Palaniswami used to bring works of spiritual philosophy to study, but the only ones he had access to were in Tamil, a language of which he knew very little, so that it caused him immense labor. Seeing him struggling in this way, the Swami picked up the books, read them through, and gave him a brief synopsis of their essential teaching. His prior spiritual knowledge enabled him to understand at a glance what was expounded, and his wonderful memory retained it when read, so that he became erudite almost without effort. In the same way, he later picked up Sanskrit, Telugu, and Malayalam by reading books brought to him in these languages and answering questions in them.